right. Hello, everybody, and hello, Herbert. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Joanna. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, and once again, I want to thank you for giving a webinar back in April just for all Taiwanese teachers. That's very special for us. Thank you also for agreeing to share with us or kind of like remind the teachers some of their Q&A, their questions, which I think most of them you did answer in real time during the webinar, but I think it would be a good reminder, especially in a kind of like a back to school session, for us to review some of your great thoughts. For me, that was very insightful.
Thank you. Well, welcome, dear colleagues in Taiwan, to this Q&A session. I would like to thank you very, very much for your interesting questions. Just to make this clear, I'm talking here from my study in my home in Austria. So Joanna I've prepared a PowerPoint. Joanna's got the PowerPoint, and she's going to share the PowerPoint now. And I will have to ask you, Joanna, to switch to the next slides whenever it's needed. As I've said, thanks so much for your excellent questions. In fact, Joanna, if we go to the next slide, we can see I've prepared a bunch of flowers for you all for thinking deeply and coming up with such interesting questions. Well, actually, here are the questions that we didn't manage to answer in the live webinar. Joanna, please go to the next slide. Okay, so here's the first question. What can we do to inspire students to focus on their learning, on their study, even when they are faced with the threat of getting distracted by the internet? And this is, of course, a huge problem, even these days with young learners. So not only with teenagers, even with some young learners, we have this problem in many countries around the world. If you took part in my webinar on teaching teenagers, you may remember that I briefly spoke about this distraction, and I have reused a couple of slides here. So when we go to the next slide, we can see that there is research. Actually, this is a quotation from a 2020 study where they say the prevalence of digital communication has changed the way teens interact with their peers. Because of this, many teens lack essential interpersonal communication skills, like knowing how to pick up on social cues. And teens' social media and texting habits are changing the way they communicate, date, learn, sleep, exercise, and more. In fact, the average teen, and I have no idea how many hours this would be in your country, but the average teen spends over 9 hours each day using their electronic devices. And this is, of course, something that has a significant influence on their learning. And this influence is not always a positive one. So can we have a look at the next slide? Yeah, okay. On the other hand, of course, technology offers wonderful opportunities for our students to communicate, as we've said, also to increase their creativity. So the question is, how can we get a balance there? Joanna, please, next slide. So the question is, what can we do? Because there is also evidence that, of course, digital technologies can actually be useful. They can bring benefits. So here is a few suggestions, a few of my thoughts here on the next slide. that we need to avoid conflicts around mobile phones. I don't know how appropriate this thinking actually is for your context, but this is a quotation from a book on thinking and how it's influenced by the use of social media. The quotation goes, I'm sorry, there should be a quotation mark there at the beginning. There's evidence that teens often excessive time spent on social media can obstruct our attempts to help them grow into mature adults, as it's the dumb novelty-seeking portion of the brain driving the limbic system that induces this feeling of pleasure, not the higher level thought centers in the prefrontal cortex, email, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever they are called. These are just a few examples of social media checking constitute a neural addiction. So it can go very negative if we're not careful. On the other hand, smartphones can support the students' learning in a positive way. So what can we do? Let's go on. Here are a number of suggestions I have. Well, first of all, of course, we need to introduce a general rule about phone use, and you probably have one at your school anyway. But if not, I suggest that we have a box at the entrance of the class or somewhere else in the class, and we have a rule that unless we use the phones in the classroom, which could make sense also, students have to put their phones in a basket or in a box and switch them to silent. There have been a number of interesting studies carried out into the influence of students having their phones next to them. There was a huge study done, I think last year, where hundreds of students were asked to do complex cognitive tasks. And when they had their phone, the researchers checked whether it made a difference, whether they had their phone lying on their desks next to them while doing the cognitive tasks, or whether the phone were not present. And the results were there was a significant difference in the students' achievement. They achieved much, much, much better when the phone was not present. In other words, when they had to hand it in before the task. There was an interesting continuation of that research done next, where students again were doing a challenging cognitive task, and there was a phone lying next to them on the desk, which one was not their own phone, and two was actually switched off. And fascinatingly, although this wasn't even their own phone, and although it was switched off when the students had that phone next to them, remember, a phone that wasn't even their own phone, and the phone that was switched off, their results again were much weaker. So this is something that we need to make clear to students. We could, of course, also get them to use their phones occasionally for a purpose. For example, when students are involved in a writing task and you say, I want you to write this text now, and you have 5 minutes for that, then you could say to students, please check the time on your phones, switch on the timer on your phones, and make sure you actually finish after 5 or 6 minutes or whatever it is, okay? Likewise, when students are, for example, engaged in some kind of group work and they develop a poster in class that they might need to do their homework, then you could ask them, for example, to take a photo of that poster as a memory aid, so they have it available at home. Or when you brainstorm vocabulary on the board, you could also say, okay, now get the phones and take a photo of the board. And as your homework, you write a sentence with each of the words on the board. Just an example, okay? Occasionally, you could give them a research task that would require the use of their mobile phones. Of course, that would require the class being connected to the web. I also do something. When there is time, I say, okay, drop everything. Now you have 3 minutes, text each other. The only rule is it has to be in English. I don't want to know what they are actually writing. This is free time, so to speak, a very short time, 2 or 3 minutes, but I want them to text each other in English, okay? You could
That's very
also
smart.
you could also get them to use their mobiles to, for example, record you reading out a paragraph from a text. So they can use this for their homework. They could create a short video or make an audio recording. And of course, talking about creating videos, you could get them to record each other occasionally, for example, giving a short talk, a show and tell, or reading out a piece of text, or doing a role play activity in class. They could record that and then save these recordings throughout the year so they can see the progress of their learning. So that would be another nice idea, I believe. Okay, so let's move on and look at the next question.